Hello, everyone, and welcome to CME Palooza Spring, or welcome back to CME Palooza Spring. If you've been joining us already this morning, thanks again for joining. We've had three great sessions so far, and this is our lunch session sponsored by Daiichi Sankyo. A rising tide that lifts all boats, how supporters came together as a community for the community. Presenters today are LB Wong, Senior Director from Lilly Grants Office, Suzette Miller, Director of Medical Education, Grants and Sponsorship, GenMed. The more observant of you might notice that Suzette is not actually here. Suzette, unfortunately, is right smack in the middle of moving into a new house. And so any of you who have ever moved know how stressful and difficult that is. So Suzette is not going to be able to join us, but I wanted to acknowledge all the work that she did do helping put together this session as well. I'll also give a quick shout out to Griselda Butler from Atsuka, who was a big part of all this process, etc. She had a conflict, so she isn't presenting, but I do want to also give acknowledgement to her. And then lastly, but not least, of course, John Ruggiero, Head Medical Affairs, Medical Efficiency Acceleration Center, Daiichi Sankyo. Everyone give a big birthday greeting to John today. Hard to believe he is 30 years old today. Unbelievable how that time flies. But before we get started, everyone's favorite part of CME Palooza, the reading of the sponsors. A big thank you to our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, MedLearning Group, and PER. Our silver sponsors, the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Academic CME, Antidote Education Company, Catamount Medical Education, Hippocrates, Helio CME, Platform Q Health Education, Integrity CE, Prova Education, RedMed Ed. I forgot to move to the next screen. Platform Q Health Education, Integrity CE, Prova Education, RedMed Ed, and Vindico Medical Education. Our bronze sponsors for CME Palooza, Answers in CME, Bonum Continuing Education, CMEology, CME Outfitters, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, Integritas Communications, MedIQ, Paradigm Medical Communications, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, PrimeEd, PVI, RMEI Medical Education, and Right Medicine. Three different ways that you can ask questions. You can use our Creative Educational Concepts text line to send in questions, 267-6660-CME. You can also tweet your questions using the CME Palooza hashtag. And you can also, if you wish, you can click on the little watch on YouTube link in the bottom left corner of the screen, and you can view the session on YouTube and use the chat function within YouTube. I'll be monitoring all those different ways to ask questions. So feel free to use whichever is most convenient to you. Quick acknowledgement, we're not using Poll Everywhere for this session, but a big thank you to Array for their support of it and for the other sessions that we are using it for. And then lastly, our speaker disclosure, any opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or affiliates. I will be attempting to fill in for Suzette during this session. I have a little bit of experience with this, so I will do what I can. But at this point, I will turn it over to John and LB.
Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you. And thank you, Daiichi Sankyo and John, for sponsoring and for inviting us for this session. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on your time zone there. What we'd like to talk to you about today, we are coming from the supporter side, but we are talking about our community. And when we talk about community, we mean the entire IME community, and that involves all of us. We are all in this together, as we know. So something that we did and made happen with supporters was done to benefit all of us in our entire community. So we're so happy to be able to share this with you today. We had this idea, and the idea that we had was something that had not been done before. And it reminded us of when, if you've been told by your parent or maybe a coach or mentor in the past, is to, if you have an idea or a dream, just, work so hard to make it happen. Like, don't just stop because it hasn't happened or it doesn't exist. Push forward as much as you can and see if you can make it happen if it's that important. And that's what we did. And that's how we came together and what we're going to talk to you about here today. So we had this idea to bring together the supporter community, where the leaders of each of the grant offices of some companies, and have some type, we didn't know yet what, some type of session, forum, discussion that really could help us elevate and learn from each other, and not just us again, but the entire CME community. So this idea and brainstorming about how to make this happen, and what would that look like, and who would have to approve this, and how do we do this, all during the time when we were all still remote, because the idea came before we were remote and we had this idea. But we just kept working, and we kept trying to think about what would be the best way to do this, and what would we want to accomplish, and then how were we going to make that happen. We called it, after we decided what we were going to do to move forward, the Practice Sharing and Beyond, the IME Leadership Exchange Summit. So while we have our IACE section and community where a lot of us get together, just like other have their own sections as well. We have our industry meetings, such as Alliance or AIS or CBI, things like that. We have opportunities to be together, but not necessarily from a supporter side, to really sit together, share, dig deep into each other and learn from each other, and think about then what can we do to not only help ourselves and our companies in learning, but again, the broader community. So what drove us with this idea? Well, I think several things were a driving factor into having this idea and wanting to make this happen. And within pharma, most of us are seeing, and for the pharma supporters on the call, most of us are seeing that as medical affairs across our industry continues to push for and continues to place ourselves strategically as a third strategic pillar, meaning a third pillar equal to commercial and R&D, and where we want and have tried to position medical affairs as an equal third pillar. That's most of us from the pharma side and grant offices are under that medical affairs umbrella. And so while there's been a lot of driving work and across industry with external help, and to really help drive medical affairs to that third pillar, we've been a huge part of that. And we've been at the forefront of that, we meaning independent medical education teams. So there's been a lot of opportunity for us to take what we already had and be able to demonstrate all of the good work that existed in all of the impact measurements that we have from IME. So we were each of us from the different pharma companies were in a very good position to be able to step up and demonstrate what we do in order to demonstrate how important medical affairs is and how we want to make sure we are contributing to being that third pillar. As healthcare continues to evolve, as we know, and we want to make sure that we are using data and analytics to drive education going forward. We are a big part of that. As we said, we need to be at the forefront of helping think about what CME is going to look like in the future. And so by bringing together ideas and sharing best practices and what we're doing now and what we may think about the future, that was another opportunity to say, we need to get all of us together and be able to think about what that could look like. And we wanted to share best practices, as I mentioned, but also brainstorm again on ideas to elevate. So if you go to the next slide, Derek. So in addition to what I was saying about, medical affairs and the push for that, this is something you can take a look at some of the content, and especially the highlighted areas from John, from something where we were taking some information from a McKinsey report and just again showing how important it is that we continue to elevate in the area of independent medical education. What are HCPs asking for? What do we provide now and what don't we? How can we be better? Look at some of the areas where there are so many opportunities for us to continue to grow, but growing alone growing alone, whether it's like supporter by supporter, provider by provider, academic organization alone, like by doing it alone, it's going to be harder to really reach some of the transformation that we need to make in the CME community and meet some of the needs that are coming, where we said it, we are indispensable. We are a very important piece of it, but we need to continue to grow and evolve. Next slide, Derek. So how did we go about this? So once we had the idea and the brainstorming sessions, and many of those, to think, how could we make this work? And we'll go into more detail of that here in future slides. But we identified, we capped it. It was not to be exclusive of anything or anybody or any supporter. It was, we looked for similar sized companies with similar missions, similar grant giving, similar type of approaches. And then once we had that, we capped it. We knew we would need to cap it at some point to make it effective. So we capped it at 15 companies, and it was one person, one leader from each of those companies. And we wanted to do it in person, but at that time, last fall in September, it was still very challenging to do. And so we made it happen virtually, but it was over 3 days that we made this happen. And we spent a lot of time in designing what the pre-work would actually look like. Like, what do we want to capture? What are we allowed to capture compliantly in order to have some pre-work and some foundation for then getting us to what are we going to cover in those 3 days? What can we do as pre-reads for those 3 days? And how can we make those 3 days most effective? That pre-work was, let me go back. Even before the pre-work, we made sure, again, we used the word compliance, and we had a compliance statement every day of the 3 days that we were together. It was very important that our company's legal and E&C, ethics and compliance teams, were in alignment with what we were trying to do. We know that this exists across different industries, across pharma. That's no question. And many of us in previous roles have participated. But within our space, it really had not existed before, as we mentioned. So we made sure that endorsement was given at each company level to make sure they could participate, that they could respond to the pre-work. The pre-work was allowed. And we did all that before because we wanted to make sure what we were doing was in full compliance. We knew it ourselves, and many of us are, who have been in the space and professional, we know what we can do and we can't do, but we wanted to make sure our companies were comfortable with that as well. So we did that. And then we spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, on the pre-work. And then for the 3 days, if you'll go to the next session, next slide, Derek, for the sessions, what we did is we came up with these topics listed here. And these were topics that we wanted to cover that really spanned all of us as supporters. All the things that we do on the supporter side, these were common ground things. They were seen as priorities in the pre-work of areas people were interested in seeing. So we had the essentials of building the IME strategy. How is that done on the supporter side? Instructional design, monitoring, program monitoring, RFP and call for grants, outcomes, storytelling, sharing the impact of IME with internal stakeholders, external awareness of IME, global grants. So a couple of these things that I mentioned have been covered in some of the morning sessions here. I attended both of those today to hear those conversations, both from the provider side and the supporter side, and then quality improvement, so PIQI. So those were 8 areas where we felt very strong that they spanned all of us, that we could really have good, solid discussion, compliant discussion around, and we could come out with some actionable pieces around that, whether that was standardization, whether that was just best practice sharing, whether there was something that we could do for the broader community, especially to make things easier on the provider side. So a lot of our discussions, so to the providers who have joined the call or will be listening, we want you to know, how much we value you. and how much we see that we are all in this together. As we've said, we are in this together. You need us, we need you, we need to all be together in this approach, both now and as we plan for the future of where IME is going. And so we know and recognize it's hard to adapt to a lot of different formats and styles and approaches to on the supporter side, and we recognize that. So we wanted to take this opportunity as we were sharing best practices and looking for opportunities where maybe standardization was a possibility, or at least maybe something where we could come closer to standardization because we're all doing similar things, but we may be doing it differently. A lot of what we discussed too, so how we approached it was that we would have, since all the pre-work was done, we would have experts that we had identified in each of these areas, 1 to 2 experts. We had a couple of people outside of the supporter, which are industry thought leaders, that were joined us as well. And so depending on the topic, we would have 1 to 2 individuals talk through the topic, talk through how within their company, if they were a supporter within their company, how they approach it, some of the things maybe they've tried in the past that have worked and or have not worked, and really just openly, again, compliantly sharing in each of these areas. And by doing that, it allowed us to be able to cover everything that we wanted to cover, but also to right size it, to really pick up things that, not to stop at the output of these 3 half days that we had, but to continue on and look for opportunities to where we can continue to grow this group, grow our idea into deliverables that will help our entire community. So the value that we felt coming out of this, and I will speak as a whole right now, and then John, and then how Suzette was going to speak, and then Derek as well on behalf of his organization, is, really, again, going back to how valuable it was just to get ourselves fully focused for those 3 half days, to really think about why would we want to keep operating in a way where if we could come together, learn, share, think about the future, help our community, how valuable that was. And it was inspiring. We all left with ideas and questions still coming that we would think afterwards. Like, I remember that they said in their way of posting their RFP, they could do it this way. I need to go back and look at their pre-work and see that. Then I can reach out and ask a question, again, compliantly about their approach. So it allowed this forum to be open and comfortable with each other, and continuing to ask questions and, things that may even be interpreted one way within one company that are different in another company. So a lot of that allowed for this continuing discussion that we will talk about toward the end of this, is how we want to keep going and growing. But I want to continue to share how important it was for us that it was an idea we had that had never happened before, and we just made it work. Like just with the drive and, just thinking about the benefits that it was going to bring. So John's going to now talk about from being a part of that, contributing, and what that came out for him and for others in the group. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
LB, thanks so much. And Derek, if you don't mind, maybe we just keep it on the current slide for a second, because there's a few things that I wanted to mention that I think was really important for everybody to hear. LB is so gracious and certainly not boastful whatsoever, but I'm going to say it. This whole forum actually appeared and came to being because of an idea that LB came up with as a member of the IACE community. She had brought it to Griselda and me when I was part of the IACE leadership as well, on something that we could do as a subsection of IACE, so that leaders could come together and discuss common pain points and perhaps common practices that would address those pain points. And then, of course, COVID happened, as LB mentioned, and we had to deprioritize and then wait for that to settle so that we could re-engage or resurrect this idea. But thanks go to LB and then Griselda as well for really forming together what was an incredible summit, in my perspective. So that's one thing that I really wanted to say. The second thing is, Suzette was so disappointed that she could not join us today. She is such a supporter of the CME Palooza venue, as well as just really engaged and excited to be a presenter for it. So much so that she even called me very early this morning and just said, I want to make sure you at least message this, because this is my perspective on the slides that I added. So I'm going to try to do that justice. Don't know if I will be able to do so. Certainly not Suzette, and she's eloquent in so many ways. The other thing that I'll just mention very quickly, for those of you that don't know LB or Suzette, obviously you just heard LB speak. She is a 100% advocate for supporting one another in this community, hence the title of this session, Rising All Boats with the Same Tide. And this was not done in a way to provide you, supporter or provider, with a perspective that we were colluding in any kind of way. This really was us coming together to address those common pain points. And outside of our proprietary areas of interest and or practice, how could we come up with solutions that would make things more efficient for us and also potentially the provider community? So as a perspective, as an attendee, and the perspective that I can provide, maybe Derek, now we could go to the next slide, which, just so that everybody is aware, was Suzette's originally. Some of the things that I think are really important for you to know, there was quite a lift of work in order to participate. And the participants of this summit committed to the time it took to do that work. For example, there were 15 slides worth of pre-work that we each did to fill out specifics about not just our own profiles, but also the profiles of our organization, and then just top line comments of interest to address questions that led to those 8 topics that LB previously presented. And in addition to that, there was a background behind the scenes collection and analysis of all that data so that we could actually appreciate the trends that we were each discovering in this process of just speaking with one another. Not only was there pre-read work, but there was also pre-read material, actual read material that we needed to be prepped on so that we could engage with one another as case studies were presented. And as LB referenced, some of those experts in each of those topics addressed some of their perspectives as well. And so you see a snapshot of what that pre-read kind of material and pre-read arrangement was to the right-hand side. But I think what was more important for Suzette to get out was likely the next slide. And if we'll advance to that, I'll give some perspective. Then I'm going to pause to see if Derek, who represents his organization that also participated, may have some things to add. Maybe so, maybe not. We'll just check. The first thing is Suzette took this as wearing 2 hats, if you will. The first hat was as an experienced member in this industry, meeting the CME community. She was now being positioned to take on a new role at an organization that was asking her to build from the ground up a whole new CME department, responsible for not just CME, but sponsorships, fellowships, awards of a sponsorship nature or a scholarly nature, excuse me. And so she wanted to see how this could help drive what she needed to do in that respect, not only setting a mission and a vision, but also seeing how other leaders were moving forward through so many, whether operational or even challenging kinds of issues. She also wanted to see how to best interact with providers in a new organizational role and how to make sure that providers' questions were being clearly heard, but also compliantly addressed. The other thing that she wanted to make sure that was heard loud and clear, which I completely agree with, the other baseball cap that she wore was not just as a new builder or new engineer of a department, but what happens if you've been in your role as a CME leader on the support side, and you're being challenged to also consider how to adapt to the new environment or evolve your role and your department. She thought it was very valuable from that sense of the the word of at least the summit exercise in general, specifically because there was a conversation of not just needs assessments that lead to our strategy building, but also really truly identifying the root cause for why gaps exist. And how do we start tackling the root cause through educational design? Will that lead to RFPs that may be standardized in the future? Will it lead to potential standardized outcomes of the future, making hopefully the provider work much more efficient for you as much as it is for us? And then her surprise was that still to this day, there continues to be some legal and compliance challenges that we all thought once were addressed, but maybe being resurrected again as times change. So being able to share all of that information was just of great value to her as a participant, myself as well, because I was also a participant. Let me pause for a second and see if Derek has any perspective as well to share.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I was only a participant for one day of this. I filled in for Maureen, who was there for the others. But really, I can concur with what you said. It's always, anytime, at least for me anyway, I've worked at Pfizer now for 7.5, going to be 8 years, and I still feel like I am new to the role in a lot of ways. So anytime that I can meet with colleagues, in the same cohort like this, it always feels valuable to me to hear perspectives. Before working at Pfizer, I was on the provider side of things. So this has really been my only role position working at Pfizer. It's the only place I've ever been on the supporter side. So most of my perspective is from that. And I know we always talk about trying to keep out of our silos, but it's very easy to have that one single perspective all the time. And we know we have our ways of doing things, and we've recently, in the past couple of years, we've taken on research grants as part on our team as well. So being able to connect with colleagues from other companies and getting their perspective is good. It's very valuable. It was so even my one day on was really helpful. Just seeing issues that they have, being able to share how we've addressed things, and also just seeing that people are in the same boat.
I think it's a great segue, actually, because the last point Suzette wanted to make sure was clearly heard and understood. One of the most valuable experiences she got out of this was the ability to not just be energized by the 3-day discussion, but also further energized by connecting, whether in breaks or after the summit was done, with people she didn't regularly connect with. And she specifically called out Maureen in Pfizer.
Interesting.
She had always looked up to Maureen as a leader in this space, was so excited to be in a smaller forum where she was presenting, and so gracious to the fact that, or so thankful to the fact that Maureen was so gracious that after the summit was done, that she was willing to connect with her 15 minutes, just talk about the quality improvement case studies that she presented. And I know that it wasn't just Suzette. Other attendees found ways to connect with one another, either in breakouts or afterwards. And so, again, I want everybody to hear just 2 messages before I transition from this slide. Number one, this summit was created. It was generated from an idea of how do we do things together better when we can, because we all have the same common goal. And that will be ramified to more efficiencies for the provider community as well. Because as LB said, we cannot exist as supporters without providers, And then the second thing was, you remember the slide that LB showed where it showed the step-by-step process of what happened pre-read through day 3? Interestingly, we were able to design something like that because of what providers do every single day. What we learned from the providers, we took your model of designing educational programs and surveying the participants and seeing if we can collect outcomes based on everything that you do and translate it into our own summit. So thank you to the provider community for giving us enough skills, though probably not as skillful as you, but enough skills to be able to make a transferable relationship to the things that we wanted to do. So before I transition over to the summit to actually give you some of what resulted from this, and then to open it up to conversation, LB, I know that you were a leader in this summit, but also a participant. So did you have any perspective you wanted to add to what Suzette, myself, and Derek just provided?
I think, John, just to reinforce that, I think all of us have had that opportunity now to say, I'm questioning something, or I need some support on something, or we're getting ready to do more and more quality improvement. Let me go back to think about what was the results. What did we talk about during our summit? Who's doing it? Who's not? How do I leverage some of the experts in this space who have already been there, who have already, or who express challenges, so that we could share those challenges together, again, compliantly. I think that in itself has been, just as Suzette wanted to portray, allowed us to help each other, again, to help the entire community. The other thing I wanted to say is that it has allowed us to, and this will only continue to grow from the supporter side as we continue to look toward this and expanding and everything, is that it does allow us the opportunity, if we have a situation or a challenge internally, that we do have now some really good information, documented information, to say 80% of other companies that this, are doing one thing this way. So it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of data. It's something, but definitely I've heard from several of those who took part in the summit that they've used that type of information with their internal legal or compliance teams. And so instead of just saying, well, I know that Daiichi Sankyo does it this way because John told me one time, or we have really data to show, who's doing, because it just allows for, again, us to maybe think differently, or maybe it just hasn't been addressed in that company for a really long time. And this allowed for more discussion, and then to use that data and information and sharing. And, we comprehensively put together all of the feedback from those 3 days. We have all of the questions and answers that occurred. We have all the follow-ups. Like, that was something that was really important to us. So we just didn't stop, again, with the work and the slides that we used, is that conversation was also documented. So just to share again how the value of just these few days of putting like minds and visionaries together has really added a lot of tactical value internally within the various companies.
Agreed. Thank you for that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
John and LB, real quick. A question came in, an anonymous question. You can either address this now, I guess, or later on, whichever you prefer. But there was a question about whether or not in the discussions throughout the program, if any the outcome standardization project was ever discussed as part of that.
It was.
You'll never guess who submitted it. I won't.
That's okay. LB, did you want to address that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes. So maybe, Derek, if you don't mind, if it's not too difficult, if you could go back to the slide where there was the circular 8 topics, because I think this will be really important for people to look at while I'm answering this question. Outcomes was definitely one of the chosen discussion points that we all wanted to get to. It was number 5, outcome storytelling, sharing, and the impact of what we do every single day. There was absolute discussion about the outcome standardization project. And we recognized in the conversation that a lot of good work went into that contribution on both the provider side and the supporter side. And we ensured that we were not glancing over that was something that had to be absorbed and taken into the conversation. We did, however, go beyond that and say beyond the OSP and the language that we're so used to dealing with in our community of CME providers and supporters, we recognize in the supporter world, in the broader medical and commercial organization, they don't use the same language. They may even be reappearing in the outcome standardization project. So there are opportunities for us to look at that and refine it together as a community, to use it and to better understand what the definitions mean, but definitely to take that work into account because it's so important. So much contribution went into that, and that time should be respected. I hope that that answered the question to whoever anonymously asked. But why don't we go forward to the next slide that I was about to present? Thank you so much, Derek. So really what resulted in this? So you could probably clearly see, we're excited to share with you what is unfolding, kind of building the plane, and the plane is already in the air, but it's not fully built yet. And we recognize that there's not true tangible results other than recommendations for next steps forward. And that's okay. Because as LB said, this conversation is one of the first to happen in as large of a summit as it was. So what was our steps? The first thing is sharing information, almost as a roadshow. And that's what we committed to doing. And that's what we started to do with you today, sharing with you in CME Palooza, but also in future Alliance forums. For example, the AIS meeting taking place in May, which I hope all of you are going to because we're all three of us are planning to be there. Griselda and Anthea and Shunda would like to make sure that a section of the IACE chapter before the AIS meeting continues to talk about this. So there will be more to come there. We're hoping that there will be further conversations in the broader Alliance community as well, just to help you understand what we did and some of the updates that are progressing as we speak. The next thing is just exploring opportunities. So the first thing is interest. If you are a supporter and was not part of the summit beforehand, to LB's reference point, it was not meant to be exclusive. It was just finding all similar types of companies with similar budgets and similar focus areas just to make sure something effectively happened. We now are broadening it beyond just that smaller 15 participants. And if you have interest, just go ahead and email LB, email me, email Derek if you want, and he can forward it to us. We'll make sure that if you have some participant interest, that it gets to the right people so that you're invited for future forums. And when might those future forums be? We were talking as a summit that it would likely start planning for that would start around this time, around April, because we wanted to have the opportunity to start exposing the community to this. But then in addition to that, the forum itself may actually not physically take place until like fall of 2022. And that could be virtual or it could be in person. Maybe it's hybrid. We just don't know the way the world is moving these days, but we're adaptive. And that's the way we should all be. That's the culture that we're adopting at this point in time now with everything we face in the last 2 years. But some of the potential deliverables that we'll discuss at this future forum, as well as what you should know came from this past summit, are what you see on the right. And we really do think, and by we, I mean all the participants of the summit, really do think that this is achievable. The first thing is we believe that we can come together as a supporter community and finally get to a place where if the supporter chooses to, you don't have to, but if the supporter chooses to, the option of using a standardized template will be there so that providers may have the opportunity to see a Daiichi Sankyo RFP that looks very similar to a Lilly RFP, even though it may be in totally different therapeutic areas, but at least you know what you're being asked of, what you'll be expected to submit, etc. So again, the resource would be available if supporters choose to use it. The second thing would be a standard independent medical education supporters monitoring form. So for the providers out there, knowing that your activities are often observed by us in a silent mode, whether they're live in person or live virtual or enduring virtual or some kind of other hybrid model. We audit the activities as much as we can because we want to message to our larger organizations the fantastic work that you did. That's really why we're auditing, in addition to being compliant and adherent to the grant that was supported, okay? So if there's a common monitoring form that we're all using, again, if supporters choose to use it, if a reference and resources made available to them, that gives the provider community a better understanding of what supporters are going to be expecting when they're looking at your activities, so that you can plan better, so that you can more effectively be prepared for any questions that might come forward, etc. The last but not least option is because, as I referenced earlier, surprising to Suzette, was that there's still a lot of ongoing questions about legal and compliance challenges through our organization, not challenges in a disparaging way, but challenges on how to get our partners in legal compliance to be on the same page. As other supporters have seen some progress and others have not, is there an opportunity to have a summit where supporters, maybe even providers, who are all focused in legal and compliance matters can come together to share best practices and common understanding of what the CME community is facing and how each one of us are dealing with those issues, to see if whether or not, I think possibly so, we could get most to the same way of operating, because surprisingly enough, there are still a lot of vast differences and different practices that supporters go through when it comes to legal and compliance. So that's where I'm going to pause to see if LB or Derek have any perspective on what was just shared on this slide. And then maybe we can open it up to any questions you've been collecting, Derek, as well as questions you might have of us. So let's first pause and see if LB and you have perspective. LB, did you want to start?
Yeah, I think our approach was to start small. You know, like there were a lot of ideas and there were a lot of things that came out of that we could potentially do. But we needed to show that we were going to have the capacity, the drive to still keep going. So we wanted to start small. So we've been making, on number 3, we've been making progress with CME Coalition, for example, of sharing ideas about what this could look like, so that we're not any one company is owning it, for example. But again, it's going to benefit the larger community there. So that is underway. For the standardization, if you will, that John is mentioning, I mean, think about it as if we had, just some standard templates like you might have in your own organizations that you can pull off, but they're templates that can be like, say, resource documents that you don't have to go through a procedure change to make a change to it. It's really just some good practice that we could pull from somewhere, some central type of place, so that if you wanted to have ideas, or if you're like Suzette was, starting up a new organization, or just kind of refreshing some of the things from the supporter side that, again, we're all doing. It was really to start small with that and think about some tangible things that we could do that could be beneficial. We, for example, of those 15 companies, the majority, of course, are doing monitoring. Majority. If we were able to share examples, and if companies were comfortable with that, we shared examples. And so we were able to look and see from different ones things that may be missing. Or something that someone said, oh, I didn't even think to look for that. We kind of looked this way, but that's a really great idea. I'm going to update my monitoring form. We had examples of people, that were called out, again, those kind of experts that we would, that gave their perspectives during that part of the session, that shared, we used to do it like this, but we added this because of this. And so there were a lot of aha moments that we took away that we could even make practice change right away for those of us who chose to do so. But we want to, again, help the broader community. So we never stopped with just who was participating at that time. We always had the mindset that we want to help the bigger, broader community, providers alike. So if we could come to some type of, get something that would be standard enough, not expected that everybody has to use it. But gosh, we could get a lot further than where we are today when we're all doing monitoring, but with all a different form, for example. So just even again, those small things were valuable. But I think that our list, we could show a lot longer list here if we had all the ideas that came out of it. But we wanted to see what we could do and what deliverables we could make as some kind of quick wins, and then move forward with some of the other ideas that were there and that will evolve in future summits.
Fair point, LB. Thank you so much. Derek, did you have perspective or did you want to dive into questions?
Sure, I'll just share one quick thing and then I'll get into questions. With the legal compliance summit, I love the idea and hate the idea at the same time, if that's possible to have both of it. I mean, I think that we're always going to have issues and questions related to legal and compliance. So I think being able to get together to discuss would be great. I also, I fear it might be dreadfully boring. Is that terrible to say? No, I'm sure that it would not be, but I just did the thought of
exciting compliance and legal people now.
I'm sure there'd be some way to make it fast.
Right.
But I do like the idea. I mean, I think it would be very beneficial. But yeah, I'm trying to check on our time. We are at 46. Okay, we're doing good. I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
And I'm happy to chime in on these as well. But the first one is, there was a question about whether or not we were able to share the slides being presented today. I don't know. I'm always happy to post them online or whatever, but I don't know how either of you feel about the sharing.
Oh, you're talking about the actual presentation slides?
The actual presentation, yeah, from these.
Oh,
I think the slides were sharing today.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any issue with that at all. LB, I'll ask you too.
Yeah, not at this level. I thought they were going to say the slides from the actual summit, which we all agreed to, that we were, we would keep that within, and we kind of signed for that we would do that. But yeah, for the approach that we took and everything, happy to share those.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay.
We just want to also want to protect the participants' privacy because they joined and put so much pre-work into it with a lot of level of commitment that we don't want to share that with the whole world if it's not necessary at this point. But maybe in the future, as this expands, people will get more exposed to more and more of that information.
Great. Okay, so a question that I want to get to is that it sounds like there's been, there may be opportunity for supporters to standardize an RFP template, as we have on there, and a CME activity monitoring form. Do you anticipate supporters will be able to do this and consistently use them? That's part A. I'll just give you part B a while too, if you want to do both.
Oh, sure.
And if so, how might this help the provider community as well? Okay.
Got it. LB, do you want me to take a stab and then I'll?
Yeah, please.
I do think that there would be, based on the 15 participants who were part of this initial summit, and hopefully additional participants in a future summit, there was a great significant interest in people doing what they could from what resulted from the summit. So whether it is a handful or all of those who participated, I absolutely do think we will get to, before the year is done, having some kind of reference document for both of those things, 1 and 2, that you see on the slide, that supporters can choose to use if they want. And I think that it goes back to what I previously said on how this helps the provider community. The more you see a standard approach on how we are managing grant giving, and not just grant review, but also activity monitoring, the better you can be prepared, can plan, can be ready to address questions that may come from any supporter after the monitoring of activities. The better you can be prepared on how to design your outcomes and report those outcomes using both the outcome standardization project as well as the language that may be important for our organizations. It's just going to make things much more efficient. And so that is my perspective. LB, do you want to add to that?
No, well said.
Thanks. I should start every day with LB. She makes me feel so
well said.
It reminds me a little of back when the disclosure forms. I don't know how many of you remember this, but it says the Alliance, boy, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but put together a disclosure form for everyone to be able to use. Honestly, that was early on for me. I don't remember exactly how it came to me, but it was shared. Yeah, many years ago. This is back in maybe this is showing my age. And it was one of those where it was put out for everyone to be able to use. And I think there were some questions as to how much it would be used, and then you would start to see it to different people. So some people use it, some people didn't use it.
Right there, and you know, and to that point, as LB said, this is just really the start of an idea.
Yeah.
If we can broaden that idea and expand it to actual solutions that people could choose to use if they want, great. If you don't choose to use it, that's fine too. You know, but if there's something available, tools that can help all of us providers include it, why not? Why not explore it? The other thing that came up as LB referenced, we could list a lot of other things on this current slide. But one of the other topics that was discussed is how do you present the value of what you did, whether in a medical team meeting or to executive leadership or stuff. So we were even talking about having a slide library that we could all add to put in like our best of the best slides as examples, so that other supporters could like choose to use certain slides that might work for them too. So there's a lot that can come out of this conversation, which again doesn't go into any kind of proprietary interest or collusion. I just love that this was able to happen. I was really grateful to be participating in it.
And there was a follow-up to that actually about specifically the supporter monitoring form and provider activity evaluation tool as to whether or not these will actually be shared with providers or not, or if that will be, I think there's curious as whether or not that would be something that actually gets shared or how that would work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe that this was the case, and I don't think sharing this is sharing anything confidential. In the summit, we did say that if any of the forms we're creating are going to impact the provider community, we should probably ask for their feedback on the forms. And I think this particularly was one of those examples.
I think so too. I don't remember the details, but I do remember us talking again about we're not trying to, it goes back to we are in this together. So when we say monitoring, we're monitoring because we supported a grant that we believe the instructional design was so strong and the outcomes methodology will result in a change to clinical practice and patient outcomes. Like, so, you know, when we all have that, say, all of us across the entire community have that same vision, we all care so much, as was why we are in our roles. You know, those type of things are not things that we see are secret of any nature, you know, or anything like that. And we don't call it provider evaluation by all means. We call it monitoring form of a grant activity.
That's right.
Just to be clear. We did not go, and you saw on the 8 topics, we did not go into talking about providers and provider days or the way we approach, nothing like that. You know, we talked about things that were the supporter side that we all experience and go through. So that was something, again, very important to us. But, you know, we value that input and we value the partnership. And to John's point, like, you know, just there's so many more ideas that we could do. And I think this just goes into us thinking about our future. Where do we want to be? What we said a lot during our summit is that the more we can learn and have best practice, and whether it's standardization or whatever that is, the more we can focus on really where our teams. So we had leaders were a part of this, you know, leaders that lead their grant offices. Okay. So the more that we can get to the operational standardization or things like that, the more we can really focus on, you know, good quality, looking at grants, instructional design, reviewing outcomes, telling the impact and value story, all the things that we need to do and be passionate about, the more that will allow us that opportunity to do that. So, you know, a lot of this goes to, again, we all care. It was clearly demonstrated during the summit of what an amazing community we have of people who really care about this space and want to see it continue to evolve. That was very inspirational, wasn't it, John?
It was. And I think what you said, LB, needs to be reinforced. It needs to be reinforced because it's really important for the providers who are listening to hear this. We committed in the last summit. This is not a forum where we're getting together to talk about individual providers, to evaluate them and critique them, and to compare them. And we committed that future summits would not do that either. This is about lifting us all up with efficiencies. So, Derek, did you have other questions or comments?
I have one. We have about 2 minutes, so maybe you
Okay.
can address quickly, and then we'll go in. Really, just sort of a general question about love all the ideas and topics. Is there consideration being given to just sort of assure that there aren't duplicative efforts being? Did I say the right? Duplicative efforts going on with like the Alliance or any other, sections, organizations.
Yeah, we working closely with the IACE membership section. We want to start working closely with the Alliance, which is why Griselda wants us to have a conversation at AIS for that very reason, to make sure there's not duplicative efforts. There's also a forum that exists that Patty Jasek and Pam Mason in Equal Partnership have been leading for so much time and so effectively, that allows supporter leaders to engage with the ACCME on a regular basis. And we even spoke with them about, and they were participants too, not to like call them out and embarrass them. We spoke with them, are there ways that we can combine forces with that too? So we are definitely thinking about all of that. If there's anything that we're missing, please let LB and me know.
Yeah.
Because we just may not be exposed to it. And I would be remiss if I did not take this time, Derek, in the last remaining minute to say, number one, I'm just so proud that my company continues to sponsor CME Palooza and for the opportunity to do so again this year, and to use this session to talk about something that goes above and beyond Daiichi Sankyo. Just because I think that LB's idea was so important, the forum, the summit was so important. And I'm just so happy to see all the list of 3 slides, I think it was, of supporters of CME Palooza. This is just such a great forum for all of us. And personally, I just thank you for your time. And thanks for the birthday wishing, too. I'll take 30. I won't argue that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you.
And LB, thank you, LB, too, for your participation.
Pleasure.
Thank you both. We are at our ending time, but thank you both for the great conversation. Excellent presentation. Look forward to hearing more about what is to come. For everyone watching, thank you. A reminder that if you have a moment, please take our CME Palooza survey. Share, especially if you have topic ideas. We love to hear. We're always looking for new, interesting topics. What you find most valuable and interesting, let us know. There's a little link right on the live page you can click on. It's very short. It'll take you 60 seconds to do. Lastly, to view the next session, just go onto the live page and click the link for our 1 o'clock session. Where's my list? Here we go. 1 p.m. session is Beyond Checking the Box to Achieve Commendation, Incorporating Social Determinants of Health to Address Population Health. Session sponsored by RedMed Ed and Academic CME, coming up here in 2 minutes. So once again, thank you, John. Thank you, LB. Thank you, Suzette. Good luck with your move. Hope everything is going well. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.